The family dinner started like any other, loud, bustling, and filled with the usual small talk. My sister, Sarah, was the first to dive into the details of her latest achievement. She leaned back in her chair, proudly scrolling through pictures of her newly renovated kitchen, displaying every shiny marble countertop and custom backsplash. "It's amazing what home ownership allows you to do," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction as she passed her phone around. "The equity just keeps building month after month, unlike some people who throw money away on rent every single month with nothing to show for it." Mom nodded approvingly, a smile spreading across her face. "Sarah's always been the smart one with money," she said. "Very practical, always thinking long term." I just sat there, quietly pushing my food around on my plate, trying to ignore the digs. To them, I was the underachiever, the one who worked at some small consulting firm they never fully understood, drove a 3-year-old Honda Civic, and lived in a rental in a neighborhood they thought was beneath me. At 29, most of my family thought I was just another college dropout who hadn't figured it out yet. "Maybe it's time you started thinking seriously about your future, Emma." Dad chimed in, his voice heavy with judgment. "You can't rent forever like some college student." At 29, most successful people are building equity and investing in real estate, not paying someone else's mortgage month after month. Sarah leaned back further, enjoying the spotlight. "I mean, I totally get it. Not everyone has the credit score or down payment saved up for property ownership," she added, her voice laced with condescension. "The requirements are pretty steep these days. But there are first-time buyer programs available, you know? Even for people in your particular situation." I swallowed hard, biting my tongue. My face was hot, but I couldn't find the words to argue. She had always positioned herself as the perfect one. The one who had it all figured out while I played the role of the mess up. Her degree from business school, her high-paying marketing job at a pharmaceutical company, her first house purchased at 26, it was all the evidence they needed. Meanwhile, I was just Emma. The quiet one. The one who never seemed to amount to much professionally, always appearing content with a modest lifestyle that screamed underachiever to anyone paying attention. The dinner dragged on, and the usual topics came up. Her promotion to senior marketing manager, the plans she had for her new house in the suburbs, and her dream of upgrading to a place with a 3-car garage and a pool. I nodded quietly when someone addressed me directly, playing the role I had adopted years ago. And then, the conversation shifted. Sarah, her tone still dripping with that familiar arrogance, caught my eye. "Hey, don't take what Dad said too personally," she said, leaning toward me after everyone else had moved into the living room. "He just wants to see you succeed, you know. We all do, really." I forced a smile. "I know. If you ever need advice about getting pre-approved for a mortgage or finding a good agent, I know someone who specializes in first-time buyers," she continued. She's very patient with people in your situation. I'd be happy to connect you." I smiled again, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. "Thanks, I'll keep that in mind." As I rinsed the plates in the kitchen, my mind started racing. This wasn't the first time the conversation had gone this way. These dinners always played out like a script. Sarah, with her perfect life, offering unsolicited advice and shining a light on my supposed shortcomings. And I just kept my mouth shut. It was easier that way. What none of them knew was that I had been secretly paying Sarah's mortgage for the past 2 years. It had started as a small favor after she lost her job. And then it had become something more. Something I couldn't stop. I thought about the money, $200 every month, sent quietly from my account to hers, just to keep up the illusion that she was the successful one. She had begged me not to tell the family. Her image, the image she so carefully curated, depended on the idea that she had it all figured out. And I had my own reasons for keeping quiet. I never wanted them to know that while they were lecturing me about financial responsibility, I was the one propping up Sarah's perfect little world. That night, as I lay in bed, I knew something had to change. The charade had gone on long enough. I couldn't keep enabling her while she lectured me about my life choices. Tomorrow, I was going to make a call. And it was going to change everything. The next morning, I sat down at my desk, the quiet hum of the office filling the space, as I stared at the email from my property manager. Janet's weekly report was as expected, everything was running smoothly. Occupancy rates were high, rents were coming in, and the market was stable. But my mind was elsewhere, on Sarah and the phone call I knew I had to make. I glanced at my phone, hesitating for a moment. My fingers hovered over the number I had dialed so many times before, Janet's direct line. She had no idea that I was about to stop the monthly payments that had been quietly supporting Sarah's life for the past 2 years. The weight of the decision pressed down on me. Every month, I transferred $200 into Sarah's account without fail. At first, it had been a temporary solution, just a stopgap until she found a new job. But then she found a new job. One that paid a lot less. And the payments continued. The lie had snowballed, and I was the one holding it all together, while everyone else carried on with their lives. None the wiser. I pressed the call button. "Janet," I said when she answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need you to stop accepting Sarah's rent payments." Effective immediately. There was a pause on the other end. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her tone neutral. "I can set up a different payment method if there's an issue with the current setup." "No," I said, my voice firm. "Stop accepting any payments from her, completely. Starting next month." Janet was quiet for a moment longer, likely processing my request. "Understood. Should I send a formal notice or will you be handling all communications directly?" "I'll handle it," I said. My decision was made. There would be no more pretending. No more carrying Sarah's financial weight while she paraded around as the family's successful sibling. I'd been living a lie long enough. And it was time to stop. I hung up the phone and sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. For a moment, it felt like the room had gone still, like the world was holding its breath with me. This was the moment everything changed. The rest of the day dragged on as I tried to focus on work. I reviewed rental contracts, spoke with potential tenants for new properties, and responded to emails. But my mind kept drifting back to the conversation I had to have with Sarah. How would she react when she found out that her safety net was gone? That the monthly lifeline she had come to rely on was being pulled out from under her? I knew she'd be upset, but it was necessary. She couldn't keep living in this bubble, pretending everything was perfect, while I quietly carried her financial burdens. It wasn't fair to either of us. And I wasn't going to be the one to keep enabling her illusions. That evening, when I finally called Sarah, it wasn't with the anger I'd expected. Instead, there was an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. I had been living with this secret for so long. And now it was time to lay it all out. To stop being the family's silent provider and start being true to myself. "Emma." Sarah's voice came through the line, bright and cheery, as though nothing had changed. "What's up?" "Sarah, we need to talk," I said, cutting straight to the point. There was no room for small talk now. Her tone immediately shifted, cautious. "What about? Is something wrong with the transfer system? You've been sending it every month." "So? I'm stopping the payments." I interrupted her, my words clear and deliberate. "Next month will be the last payment." Silence stretched between us for what felt like an eternity. I could hear her breathing on the other end, quick and shallow. She was processing the words, trying to make sense of what I had just said. "What do you mean stopping?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. I can't afford it on my own, Emma, you know that." "I know," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep subsidizing your life while you lecture me about financial responsibility. I thought we had an arrangement. This was temporary. You said it was just until I got back on my feet." She protested, her voice breaking with desperation. "Yeah, it was," I said, trying not to get lost in the wave of emotion rising inside me. "But it's been 2 years. 2 years of me paying for something that you can't afford. And I can't keep doing it anymore. You need to figure it out." She let out a shaky breath. "But I'm finally starting to get ahead. I'll be able to pay you back once I get a promotion. Just a little more time, please. Just a few more months, and I'll be fine." "No, Sarah. I've heard that for 2 years. It's time for you to face the reality. You can't keep living this way. It's not fair to either of us." "I can't lose the house, Emma. You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "This house means everything to me. It's the only thing that makes me feel like I've accomplished something. I can't just let it go." I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. "Then you'll have to sell it. Or down. You'll figure it out, but I'm not the one who's going to keep paying for it." The conversation ended poorly, with Sarah crying and making desperate promises. I felt guilty, but also a strange sense of relief. The charade had lasted long enough. And now, it was over. The days that followed felt like a heavy fog hanging over me. The weight of what I'd done, of what I'd finally said, was both liberating and crushing at the same time. I had ended the 2-year-long charade with Sarah, but the aftermath was far from easy. I kept replaying the conversation in my mind, over and over again. Sarah's voice had trembled with desperation. And I knew that letting go of the monthly payments was going to shatter her perfect image. The one she had so carefully built over the years. She was terrified of admitting to anyone, especially our parents, that she wasn't financially independent. That she couldn't afford the house that was supposed to define her success. The next family dinner rolled around a few days later, and I wasn't looking forward to it. I already knew what was coming: the awkwardness, the questions, the tension. Sarah would pretend everything was fine. But I knew she was already struggling with the reality of what I'd done. I walked into Mom and Dad's house, greeted by the usual warm chaos of their home. The smell of something baking filled the air. And Mom was in the kitchen, chatting with Dad about their plans for the next vacation. As usual, they seemed unaware of the storm brewing between Sarah and me. I tried to keep it together, focusing on the small talk, but I could feel Sarah's eyes on me. She was sitting across the table, pretending to scroll through her phone, but I could tell she was watching me closely, as if waiting for something to give. Her usual confident demeanor was gone. Instead, there was a quiet tension in her posture. Her shoulders were slumped, and there was no smug smile to accompany her next story about her latest and greatest project at work. The dinner conversation soon turned to real estate, as it always did when Sarah was around. This time, she was talking about her plans to renovate the master bathroom. She was casually mentioning how it was going to add significant value to the house, and how she had already contacted contractors for quotes. Of course, it's going to be a little expensive, Sarah said, looking up from her phone, her tone nonchalant. But the bathroom upgrade will pay for itself. It's an investment, you know. Adds so much to the property value. My mind was racing. I could feel the familiar, nauseating tightness in my chest as she spoke. She had no idea how close she was to the reality of losing it all. And I was the one who had been keeping her afloat for all this time, all while listening to her preach about financial responsibility. Dad, always the practical one, chimed in. You're right, Sarah. Real estate is always a solid investment. I'm glad you're thinking long term. I felt my stomach churn as I stared down at my plate. I wanted to scream, to tell them all what I had been doing, how I had been propping up Sarah's so-called perfect life, without anyone knowing. But I stayed quiet. It wasn't the time. The family dinner, as always, was a performance, and I wasn't ready to tear down the facade ad just yet. After the main course, as everyone moved into the living room to chat, I found myself alone in the kitchen again. I was clearing the plates, doing what I had done for years, just quietly moving through the motions while everyone else talked about their lives. I should have been happy for Sarah. Should have taken joy in her accomplishments. But the bitterness, the resentment was too much to ignore. And then, just as I was about to rinse the last plate, Sarah slipped into the kitchen behind me. She hesitated, standing awkwardly by the doorway, and then walked over to me, her voice soft but laced with something I couldn't quite place. She began, her eyes not quite meeting mine. I know things were weird earlier. About the mortgage. I didn't turn to face her. I kept rinsing the plate in my hands, forcing myself to focus on the task at hand. But I could feel the tension between us, thick in the air. I just want to say, I didn't mean for things to get this complicated, Emma. She continued. I never wanted you to feel like I was taking advantage of you. I set the plate down with a soft clink, and turned to face her. I looked her in the eyes, seeing the vulnerability she had never shown me before. I know you didn't mean it, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice even. But you have to understand, Sarah. This wasn't just about money for me. It was about the constant lectures, the expectations. You never asked for help, but you always acted like you had everything together, while I was the one left picking up the pieces. Her face flushed, and for a moment, I thought she might say something defensive. But instead she took a deep breath and let out a slow exhale, her shoulders slumping. I know, she whispered. I didn't mean to make you feel that way. I didn't know how to admit it. That I wasn't as perfect as everyone thought I was. The confession hung in the air between us, heavy and raw. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. For the first time in years, it felt like we were on the same page, even if just for a moment. The conversation ended with more promises from Sarah that she would figure things out. She was going to start looking for ways to downsize, to live within her means. She seemed genuine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just another cycle of promises, one she might not keep. As I left the house that night, the weight of everything still settled heavily on my chest. Sarah had always been the one to lecture me about my financial decisions, my career, my life. And now, for once, it was my turn to stop playing along. The following days were filled with a kind of quiet that I hadn't experienced in years. I thought that once I'd stopped the payments, once I'd laid down that boundary, things would feel like they had shifted. But they hadn't, not yet at least. Sarah was quieter than usual, a strange mix of guilt and relief hanging over her. The rest of the family went on as though nothing had changed, completely unaware of the tension between us. I avoided her calls, not wanting to be the one to rehash the conversation. She knew where I stood now. But I wasn't prepared for the shift in our family dynamic that came next. It wasn't just Sarah who had changed. It was everyone else too. A week later, we gathered again for another family dinner. I hadn't expected anything different, but the moment I walked through the door, I could feel it. The air was thick with a kind of unspoken tension. Sarah was there, but she was quieter than usual. Her eyes avoided mine, and she stayed close to Mom and Dad, talking about everything but the elephant in the room. I could tell they'd noticed the change. There was an awkwardness, a hesitation in their voices when they spoke to Sarah, as if they could sense something wasn't right. But no one said anything directly. They didn't need to. I could feel the invisible divide growing between us, and it was painful. I wasn't the only one who knew something had shifted. Dinner proceeded in the usual way, Sarah talking about her plans, Dad giving his usual advice about financial responsibility, and Mom doting on everyone. But as much as I tried to engage, it all felt hollow. I couldn't focus on the conversation. My mind kept drifting back to Sarah, who now seemed to be carefully crafting every word, every story she told. After the main course, Sarah excused herself, retreating to the living room, probably to hide behind her phone or whatever else gave her comfort when she felt exposed. I didn't blame her. I could feel her shamed. But I didn't know what to do with it. As I helped Mom clear the dishes, I could hear Sarah on the phone in the other room, her voice too low for me to make out. But the frustration was clear. Her usual self-assured tone had cracked. For the first time, I was hearing vulnerability in her voice, and it made my chest tighten. Was she finally starting to understand what I'd been doing? Or was it just the beginning of her inevitable slide into denial? I finished drying the last dish, and glanced at the doorway leading to the living room. Sarah was on the phone, her back to me, but I could tell she was pacing now. Her movements were sharp, frantic. I had no idea what she was saying, but I could guess. Her mind was racing, calculating her options, whether to sell the house, whether to call in more favors. Her pride wouldn't let her admit defeat. I walked into the living room, casually leaning against the doorframe. "You doing okay?" I asked, my voice softer than I'd intended. She stiffened when she saw me, quickly ending the call. Her eyes flicked to mine, but she didn't say anything at first. She didn't have to. The conversation we'd had a week ago was still fresh between us, and I could feel her trying to decide if she should apologize again. But she didn't. Instead, she gave me a tight smile, forced and distant. "I'll figure it out," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "Yeah, you will," I replied, my heart aching as I said the words. "But you need to do it on your own now." The silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we couldn't say. I didn't have the words to fix this. And I didn't know if I could help her anymore. The next few days were filled with texts, mostly from Sarah, asking for advice on how to start downsizing, on what kind of loan she should apply for, on the best way to sell a house quickly. She was still trying to make it seem like everything was under control, like she had it all figured out. I ignored most of them. I wasn't going to give her the answers this time. She needed to find them herself. She had to learn to live within her means, even if it meant facing the reality she had been avoiding for so long. It wasn't until the following weekend that Sarah showed up at my apartment. I wasn't expecting her, and when I saw her standing in the hallway, her hands nervously twisting in front of her, I didn't know what to say. "I need to talk," she said, her voice tight with emotion. I stepped aside, letting her in. The apartment was quiet, just the hum of the fridge and the occasional car passing outside. We both stood there for a moment, neither of us knowing how to begin. Finally, Sarah spoke. "I'm sorry. I know you've been saying I need to stop relying on you, but I didn't realize how much I was actually doing it. I thought I could just keep going, keep pretending." I looked at her, my expression hardening. "It's not about pretending anymore, Sarah. It's about facing up to the fact that you've been living a lie, and I can't keep enabling it." "I know," she said, her voice breaking, "but I can't do this alone. I'm not strong enough." You will be," I said, my voice more firm than I'd meant. "You don't have a choice now. But you'll figure it out. You're smarter than you give yourself credit for. Just stop pretending like everything is fine." She wiped her eyes, nodding silently. "I'll try. I just don't know how to do it without you." "You'll do it," I said, my voice steady. "You'll learn how to stand on your own 2 feet, just like I did." The visit ended with more awkward silence, but there was something different about it. Sarah was no longer looking for someone to take care of her, at least not in the same way. It was a small step, but it was progress, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we were both finally ready to stop pretending. The following week, things between Sarah and me remained strained, though I could feel the change in the air. There was no denying that we were both treading through uncharted territory. Sarah still hadn't figured out what to do with the house, and every time we spoke, it was about the same thing: the house, the bills, the future. She seemed determined to handle it on her own now, but I could see the cracks forming in her self-assurance. She still tried to reach out, asking for advice, but I had drawn the line. I didn't want to be the one to save her again. I had already done my part. My success, my quiet wealth, had allowed me to play that role for years, but no more. I couldn't keep being her fallback plan. It was late one evening when Sarah called. I hadn't expected it, but her name lit up the screen. I stared at it for a moment, debating whether or not to answer. I could feel the tension still hanging between us like a thick fog, but this time, there was something different about her tone in the brief message she left. "I need to talk to you. Can we meet?" The request was simple, but there was an urgency in it that I couldn't ignore. Maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. I called her back, my mind running through what she might say, what she might ask of me now. When I picked up the phone, her voice came through low, hesitant. "Emma, can we meet? I think I need to tell you something." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop a few blocks from my place. When I arrived, I saw Sarah sitting at a small table by the window, her hands clasped in front of her. Her posture slumped in a way that made her look smaller, more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. The confident woman who used to strut through family dinners now seemed like a shadow of herself. I sat down across from her, not sure what to expect. She looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed and tired, and I felt a wave of something I didn't know if it was sympathy or frustration, wash over me. "I'm really sorry, Emma," she began, her voice quiet but firm. "I've been avoiding you, avoiding the truth. I didn't want to admit that I wasn't as perfect as I let everyone believe." I didn't say anything at first. There was no point in interrupting her. She had to say it all, and I knew the longer she stayed silent, the harder it would be. I've been living a lie. I kept telling myself that if I worked hard enough, if I just kept going, it would all work out. But it didn't. I can't afford this house anymore. I've been getting by on credit cards and loans, and I've been lying to everyone, especially you. I felt my stomach twist. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, to shout, "I told you so." But instead I just sat there, listening. She had done what I never thought she would, admitted it. "I can't keep pretending," she continued, her voice shaking now. "I thought I was doing okay, but I'm not. I'm barely hanging on, and I don't know how to fix it." For a moment, there was nothing but the soft hum of the coffee shop around us. I wasn't sure how to respond. It wasn't the first time she had said something like this. But it was the first time it felt real. The weight of her words hit me differently this time, maybe because I finally realized that she was, for the first time in years, taking responsibility for her mistakes. "I'm sorry I put you in this position," Sarah said, looking down at her hands. "I never meant for you to have to cover for me. I know I've been selfish, and I just didn't want to admit that. I didn't want to admit that I was failing." "You weren't failing," I said quietly. "You were just pretending everything was fine. And it wasn't. You don't have to do that anymore." She looked up at me, a small, tearful smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I wish I could be more like you, Emma. You've always had your shit together, and I've just been a mess." "You're not a mess," I replied a little sharper than I meant to. "You just got caught up in something you couldn't handle. But this," I gestured between us, "this is the first step. Admitting you have a problem is the first thing you have to do. Now you can fix it." Sarah nodded, her face brightening slightly. "I don't know how yet, but I'm going to try. I'm going to sell the house. Downsize, find something I can afford. Maybe even take a second job if I need to. I don't care. I'm done pretending." There was a quiet understanding between us now, something that hadn't been there before. She wasn't asking me for a bailout. Wasn't trying to manipulate the situation. She was facing reality, and for the first time, I could see the Sarah I had once admired, the one who could tackle a challenge head on. "I'm proud of you," I said, my voice softer than I had intended. "It's not going to be easy, but you'll get through it. You just have to be honest with yourself from now on." We sat there for a few moments in silence, letting the weight of the conversation sink in. When I looked up again, Sarah was wiping her eyes, but she was smiling, a genuine smile, the kind I hadn't seen in years. "Thanks, Emma," she said, her voice steady now. "For everything." I nodded, not knowing what else to say. It wasn't a clean resolution. It wasn't a perfect ending. But it was a beginning. And that was enough for me. As I left the coffee shop, I felt a small sense of relief. The air between us was clearer now. I wasn't her savior anymore, but maybe, just maybe, she didn't need me to be. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity, but not the kind I had imagined. Sarah had started making decisions, real decisions. The kind that required her to face the consequences of her actions. She listed the house, started looking for a smaller, more affordable place, and even began reaching out to a financial advisor. I could see the effort, the strain, but also the determination in her. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't running away from her problems. It was strange, seeing her actually work to solve things, instead of running to me every time there was a financial hiccup. She wasn't asking for help anymore, wasn't relying on me to cover her mistakes. She was standing on her own 2 feet. I didn't know if she was ready for it, but at least she was trying. And that was a start. It was a Saturday afternoon when I got the call from Sarah. She'd been quiet for a few days, and I figured she was just focused on her house sale and getting everything in order. I hadn't expected her to reach out again so soon. "Emma." Her voice came through tentative, almost nervous. "Can we talk?" I braced myself. "Yeah, what's up?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I think I'm ready to tell them. I want to tell Mom and Dad everything, about the house, about how I've been struggling. I think it's time." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. I knew this moment would come eventually. But hearing it from her now made the reality of it all settle in. She was going to tear down the walls she had so carefully built. She was going to admit to the family what I had known all along, that her success had been a facade. I felt a mix of pride and anxiety. I didn't know how Mom and Dad would react. They had always assumed Sarah had it all figured out, while I was the one they pitied. Would they look at her the way they had looked at me for all these years? Or would they be understanding, even supportive? "Are you sure?" I asked, the weight of the question hanging between us. "I'm sure," she replied, her voice quieter now. "I don't want to hide anymore. I can't keep pretending. It's time." That evening, we gathered at Mom and Dad's house again, the familiar scent of food and conversation filling the air. This time, though, something was different. There was an edge to the conversation. A tautness in the air that I couldn't shake. I sat at the table, my eyes flicking to Sarah, now and then, wondering how she was feeling. She was sitting straight, her posture tight. her hands clenched together in her lap. I could see the fear in her, the hesitation, but she was determined to go through with it. Dinner passed in the usual way. Mom asking about work, Dad making casual remarks about the weather. The conversation meandering through harmless topics. But I could feel the undercurrent of something unsaid. Sarah was sitting on the edge of her seat, her eyes darting to me, then back to Mom and Dad. She was waiting for the moment, waiting for the right time to drop the bomb. Finally, after dessert, the silence fell. The weight of what was coming was palpable. I need to tell you something, Sarah said, her voice steady but tight. Her eyes were wide, searching the room for something, anything, to anchor her. She looked at me for a split second before turning back to Mom and Dad. I can't keep pretending anymore. I've been struggling financially for a long time. And I've been hiding it from all of you. The house I bought, I couldn't afford it. Mom and Dad both froze. Their faces, which had been filled with the usual smiles and small talk, now turned to expressions of confusion and disbelief. I could see Dad's brows furrow, as he tried to process what Sarah had just said. What do you mean? Dad asked, his voice more guarded now. I thought you were doing well. Your job, the house, you always seemed like you had it together. Sarah swallowed hard, her eyes brimming with tears now. She had never looked more vulnerable, more human, than she did in that moment. I wanted to be the perfect daughter. The one who had it all figured out. But I've been living paycheck to paycheck. Borrowing money just to keep up with the mortgage. And I've been using credit cards to cover the rents. I've been getting by on loans, and I haven't told anyone the truth. The room was silent, heavy with the weight of Sarah's confession. I could feel my pulse quicken. My own emotions flaring as the truth finally spilled out. All the years of her subtle lectures, all the assumptions the family had made about my life, came crashing down in one moment. And Sarah. She was no longer the golden child. She was just Sarah, facing the consequences of her actions. Wouldn't you tell us? Mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I was ashamed, Sarah said, her voice breaking. I didn't want to let you down. I thought if I kept up the act, you wouldn't see how much I was struggling. I didn't want to be the failure in the family. I couldn't handle it. Dad leaned back in his chair, looking at her, his face a mix of disbelief and concern. But why didn't you ask for help? Why didn't you talk to us sooner? I didn't want to admit that I couldn't do it on my own. Sarah whispered. I didn't want to admit that I wasn't perfect. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. I sat there, watching, waiting for the fallout to unfold. Sarah's confession had cracked something open. Something that couldn't be put back together the way it was. The family meeting that followed was a mixture of awkward glances and muted questions. Mom and Dad were still processing the shock, trying to understand how they had missed all the signs. There were no comforting words. No reassurances. It was just a quiet reckoning, and for the first time in a long time, the family felt real. At the end of it all, I watched Sarah wipe away the last of her tears. Her face flushed with the weight of what she had done. She wasn't perfect anymore. And for once, that was okay. Because maybe now, she could begin to rebuild, not just her life, but her relationship with the family. And maybe, just maybe, I could stop being the family disappointment. The aftermath of Sarah's confession was, in many ways, more difficult than the moment itself. It wasn't that anyone had judged her outright, at least not openly, but the shock was palpable. Sarah had spent years crafting an image of success, and to suddenly tear it down left everyone reeling. Mom and Dad were still processing what they had just learned. And I, too, was caught in the tension of it all. In the days that followed, the family didn't know how to handle the new reality. Sarah was no longer the perfect daughter, with the beautiful home and thriving career. She was, in many ways, more like me than she ever had been willing to admit. Someone who had struggled, who had made mistakes, who wasn't always able to keep it all together. But for the first time, I saw a glimmer of something different in her. Vulnerability. And maybe even, for once, honesty. The first dinner after the family meeting was awkward, to say the least. Mom and Dad were quieter than usual, and Sarah, well, Sarah wasn't herself. She was trying to act like everything was fine. But it was clear that her facade was shattered. The perfect sister I had once envied was now just another person trying to figure things out, struggling to rebuild what had crumbled beneath her. Are you okay, sweetheart? Mom asked, Her voice soft, more concerned than she'd ever been in the past. I could see the worry in her eyes. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah looked smaller than usual. Her confidence had evaporated, replaced by a quiet humility that seemed out of place for her. "I'm okay," Sarah replied, her voice unsteady. "I'm just trying to get things together. I need to figure out how to fix this mess." "I'm proud of you for being honest," I said, breaking the silence. I wasn't sure if I meant it, or if I was just trying to ease the tension. But for once, Sarah's vulnerability didn't make me feel angry or resentful. It made me feel something else, a mixture of relief and empathy. "I didn't think I'd be able to do it," Sarah admitted, her eyes flicking nervously to Mom and Dad. "I thought I could keep up the act forever, but it wasn't sustainable." "You don't have to be perfect, Sarah," Dad said, his tone more thoughtful than I had ever heard. "You've always had us, even if you didn't think so." That was the moment I realized that the dynamic in our family had shifted. There was no longer a perfect daughter and a failing one. There was just a family trying to come to terms with their reality. Sarah wasn't a golden child anymore, and I wasn't the black sheep. We were both just people, struggling in different ways, but somehow finding common ground. Over the next few weeks, Sarah took real steps toward rebuilding. She followed through on her decision to sell the house, started looking for a smaller place that would be within her actual means. The process wasn't easy. There were setbacks, low offers, unexpected costs, and moments when I could see her frustration. But she didn't give up. She kept pushing forward. I stayed out of it as much as I could. But I couldn't ignore the fact that Sarah was changing. She was actually facing the consequences of her choices, no longer relying on me or anyone else to bail her out. It wasn't easy for her, and I knew it wouldn't be. But I had to respect her decision to go through this alone. I couldn't keep enabling her, and deep down, I knew she didn't want that anymore. I watched her struggle, but I also watched her grow. And, for the first time, I wasn't resentful, I wasn't angry, I was proud of her. She was finally doing what I had done all along, learning to stand on her own, no longer pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. The family dinners that followed had a different vibe. There was less talk of Sarah's successes, fewer lectures about real estate and the importance of investments. Instead, we talked about everyday things, what was going on in the market, how Mom's garden was doing, how Dad's new hobby was coming along. There was less competition, less judgment. It was still awkward, but in a way that felt more real, more human. For once, we weren't trying to one-up each other or pretend to be something we weren't. Sarah's emotional walls had started to come down, and it was clear that she was no longer just the success story. She was a person, imperfect, struggling but trying. And that was something I could finally understand. A month later, Sarah sold the house. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't for as much as she'd hoped, but it was done. She found a small condo, something modest but affordable, something she could actually sustain on her own. When she told me, she was almost embarrassed, as if she had failed somehow. But I didn't see it that way. "Congratulations," I said, my voice steady. "You did it." "I guess I did," she said, her voice light with relief. "Feels weird, but it's the right thing." I could tell she was still processing everything. But she was finally starting to understand what I had known for so long. You can't keep running from the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it is. Eventually, you have to face it head on. At the next family dinner, things were different. Sarah wasn't bragging about her house or her job. Instead, she talked about her new place, how she was slowly making it her own. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. And that was all that mattered now. Dad even asked her for advice about his finances. For the first time, he was looking to her for insight, not judgment. I could see Sarah's discomfort with the attention, but I could also see something else, a quiet pride in the fact that, even though she wasn't perfect, she had done something right. I didn't need to say anything. The change was already evident. For once, I wasn't the only one who had figured things out. And for once, I wasn't the family disappointment. Neither was Sarah. We were just two people who had made mistakes, but were finally learning to live with them. And in that moment, I realized that the family dynamics would never be the same. And somehow, that felt like a victory. The weeks that followed Sarah's move into her new condo were quieter. Less dramatic. And yet, I could feel the shift in everything. The weight of the past few years, the grudges, the unsaid words, all began to slowly fade away. We weren't perfect. None of us were. But for the first time in a long time, the air between Sarah and me felt lighter. She settled into her new place, one that was more modest but also more manageable. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. And she wasn't drowning in debt to keep up with a house that was never meant for her. She had done what I thought she couldn't. She had faced the consequences and made the necessary changes. It was hard, and there were moments when I saw her doubt herself, but she was sticking it out. And I was proud of her. We talked more now. We didn't just talk about the house, or the mortgage, or her new job. We talked about everything. The weird new neighbor, her plans to fix up the condo a little, how her job was going, even her thoughts on dating again. She was no longer the golden child. She was Sarah, trying to figure things out just like the rest of us. The family dynamics had changed too. Mom and Dad were more relaxed around Sarah. They didn't look at her with the same reverence they once had. Instead, they were more understanding. Less critical. It wasn't a shift that happened overnight, but it was happening. The change in Sarah had forced them to change their perceptions. And that, in turn, made space for me to be seen differently as well. We were all just people, fumbling through life, trying to make sense of it all. One evening, a few months after Sarah had moved into her new place, I received a text from her. It was short, simple, but I could feel the weight of it behind the words. A first mortgage payment on the condo, paid entirely from my own account. Feels absolutely amazing. Thank you for everything you did, and for finally saying no when you needed to. I stared at the message for a long moment. Part of me wanted to downplay it, to say something casual like, glad to hear it. But another part of me, one I hadn't fully recognized before, was moved. She had done it. She had finally stood on her own. I texted back, keeping it simple. I'm proud of you, Sarah. A few days later, I visited her new place. I hadn't seen it since she moved in, and now that she was settled, it looked different. The place was small, but it felt lived in. There were plants in the windows. Photos scattered on the walls, a cozy couch tucked into the corner. It was simple, yes, but it was hers. And for the first time in years, it felt like she was building something real. Not a facade, not an image, but a life. We sat down on the couch, sipping wine like we used to before everything had gotten complicated. I still can't believe it's all real, she said, glancing around. I feel free, you know. Like I'm finally living the way I'm supposed to. You are. I replied, my voice steady. You're doing it the right way this time. She smiled at me, that familiar smile, but it was different now, softer. Warmer. I don't know how to thank you for everything, Emma. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stepped in. You don't have to thank me, I said. I just want you to be okay. And I think you are now. She nodded, her eyes sparkling with something new, confidence. Maybe, or maybe it was relief. Whatever it was, I saw it, and I knew she was finally on her way. A few months later, the family was gathered again. This time, there was no tension in the air, no underlying judgment, no carefully constructed images of success. We talked about simple things, vacation plans, how Mom's garden was coming along, Dad's new hobby of woodworking. Sarah even brought up her condo again, excited about a new project she was working on. The conversation felt easy. Genuine. And when Sarah looked at me with that same grateful, slightly embarrassed smile, I didn't feel the old resentment bubble up. Instead, I felt peace. She had finally found her way. And I had finally found mine. I no longer felt like the family disappointment. Sarah no longer felt like the perfect one. We were both just doing our best to figure things out, one step at a time. And that was enough. As I left Mom and Dad's house that evening, I looked over at Sarah, who was chatting animatedly with Dad about some new job offer. She had done it. She had rebuilt her life from the ground up. And in some strange way, I had too. No longer stuck in the shadow of the expectations I had once fought against, I felt a quiet pride in the fact that we were both finally living our truth. We weren't perfect. But for the first time in years, I realized that maybe we didn't have to be.